I want to talk about national security in this video, but before I get to that, there's a lot going on in the news right now, and should I not make videos on these individual things? I'm just going to reflect a bit on what's been going on. Big disaster in Hong Kong. It seems that there's been a big fire in an apartment complex, 7 buildings. At least 40 have perished, and up to 300 are missing, so it's a very serious situation. It reminds me of Grenville, but on a much bigger scale. Bigger in the sense that there's more buildings affected. Um, I just hope that most of those who are missing can be found safe, but it looks like a pretty serious situation. So that's sad to see. Um, I imagine there will be some sort of inquiry, or at least debate to look into why this happened. The building was supposed to be 40 years old. In the case of Grenville, of course, it was cladding. I understand in this case, and I should emphasise, it's still a developing story. There has been some sort of bamboo foundations. But like I say, it's a developing story. In Guinea-Bissau in West Africa, a coup is underway. Not unusual in that part of the world, but still a developing story. In Bangladesh, the former leader Sheikh Hasina has been sentenced to death for her role in the brutal crackdown on students last year, which caused hundreds of deaths. That's a big development there. No doubt, her supporters are going to be robustly opposing that decision. But there's a lot going on in the world right now. Today in Britain, well, yesterday I should say, the Chancellor delivered a rotten budget. Now, I'm not going to get into that too much because I want to focus on one thing that she said. I may make another video on the financial side of it. Of course, that's the main point of a budget. But I want to talk about the national security issue. Rachel Reeves obviously thought she was being quite funny. She said, "We are ramping up sanctions on Russia and we are freezing known Russian assets. But let me be clear, I don't actually mean the Honourable Member for Clacton." That's, of course, a swipe at Farage. Well, firstly, using Russian assets to pay back to Ukraine, I welcome. I think that's a good thing. Obviously, I believe that. But I would say that right now, Labour is not really in a position to point the fingers at anyone over national security. Now, I want to be very clear, I don't trust reform, and it is right that they face scrutiny over Russia. Regarding the Nathan Gill sentencing, this was the response of a reform spokesperson. This is from last weekend's newspaper, so 22nd, 23rd of November. This is what a reform spokesperson responded to regarding the Nathan Gill sentencing. "Gill's actions were reprehensible, treasonous and unforgivable. We are glad that justice has been served and fully welcome the sentence Nathan Gill has received." So, trying to make it very clear that they support the decision and they're throwing him under the bus, basically. But I personally find it hard to believe that the Kremlin would only target a middle-ranking reform official. Now, to be clear, Gill wasn't like some low-level councillor, but nor was he at the very top of his party. He was sort of higher middle-ranking, I would say. He was the reform leader in Wales, so he wasn't a nobody. But why would Russia only target him, and why specifically him? The point here being, is it really inconceivable that Farage has been targeted? Of course, right now Farage is ramping up his rhetoric on Russia because he's under pressure, he has to. But look at Reform's track record on this. I just don't think that, I think Nathan Gill's the tip of the iceberg. So I think Reform should come under huge scrutiny for Russia, absolutely. And it isn't just the Russia stance, it's the fact I think they would throw this country under the bus for Trump. I think they'd sell the country to Trump, to be quite honest. I do not trust Reform on national security, on foreign policy generally. Pretty much all their positions in foreign policy I oppose. So I do not trust Reform. The only thing they have broadly got right is that Farage has taken a hard line on China. But that's about the only thing they've got right, in my opinion, when it comes to national security. Farage is the face of Brexit. I'm not convinced Brexit was good for this country. They would absolutely support everything Israel does. Make excuses for no matter what Israel does. It's all They'll just put out the rhetoric about it's all self-defense. It doesn't matter how many Palestinians are slaughtered, it's all self-defense. They will go along with everything Trump says and does. Um, I just think reform cannot be trusted on foreign policy. But, and this is a big but, right now, Labour's position on China, I think, deserves a lot more scrutiny. That's why, it's all very smug for Reeves to be making that joke, but her party's record in China raises a lot of questions. So, to be clear, the approval of that mega embassy apparently was actually given the green light by MI5 and MI6, which would somewhat seem to contradict their consistent warnings about state interference. I'm not quite sure why they've reached that decision and what that sort of approval, what sort of form it would take. But that's going ahead. The government's approved of the China mega embassy. I'm going to get to my thoughts on that in a second, but this is what a government spokesman says about it. Well, actually, the minister is Defence Minister Al Cairns, said yesterday that if the embassy is approved, it would be wrapped in the tightest possible measures by the intelligence agencies, saying if, but it looks like Starmer is going to go ahead and approve it. He said, "We've got the best intelligence services in the world. I'm content any country setting up a building in the UK will be wrapped in the tightest possible measures to ensure there is no threat to the UK." Except once again, we're talking that any country. Labour treats China like it's fine. It's just another country. Or they treat it like a big country that we could do business with. They still don't get it. And the fact that the security service might have been given the green light to this doesn't mean the government should do it. As far as I'm concerned, this is an ideological decision. I won't read out the whole piece because I've already spoken a lot about this. This is the piece. I should say it's by Kyriakos Petrakos and Kitty Donaldson. Just read out some of it. Starmer is understood to be planning a trip to China early next year in a bid to boost economic and diplomatic ties with Beijing. No naivety there, of course. And this is written when he was at the G20 in South Africa. This is how he responded when asked about whether he would bring up with Xi Jinping allegations of people spying on MPs on behalf of Beijing. He insisted he would robustly protect the UK's national interest when dealing with China. The meetings I'm having at the G20 aren't confirmed yet, nor is any visit confirmed yet, he said. I mean, our approach is the same approach as we've always taken, which is cooperative when we can and challenge where we must, particularly on national security. You saw that this week in relation to espionage. We had a statement in the House setting out the action the government has taken along with MI5 because we will always robustly protect our interests. And no doubt the Prime Minister will point to the fact that those two young women were named regarding the headhunting activities in the House of Commons, Amanda Chu and Shirley Chen. They were both said to be using LinkedIn profiles to contact people on behalf of China's Ministry of State Security. So no doubt the government will use that to say, oh look, we are taking this seriously. But frankly, those two young women I think are probably relatively minor players. The bottom line is this. The government seems to be deluded about what China is. This is not a government that is our friend. This is a government that tore up the Sino-British Joint Declaration and, wants to make Hong just another communist city. Many young Hong Kongers feel that the UK hasn't done enough in that regard. Yes, there's been visas issues to BNO passport holders, but there is a sense that we haven't done enough. We haven't robustly stood up to Beijing enough in that regard. The persecution of the Uyghurs speaks for itself. Concentration camps. Labour previously took a very tough stance on that. COVID. I think this is one of the most glaring things, and I think the Chinese government's basically got away with it. They may not be responsible for the virus itself. We may never know if it was a lab leak or it was from a wet market. But what we do know is that Xi Jinping's regime's initial response to that wasn't to take it seriously. It was to punish the whistleblowing doctors. people like Li Wenliang, because they embarrassed the Communist Party. And then it was to lash out at any government that called for an independent inquiry, including our friends in Australia. That's how the Chinese regime behaves. They bully smaller countries when they don't get their own way. Um, and my concern about this mega embassy, when Angela Rayner was Deputy Prime Minister, she was the minister responsible for overseeing the planning applications, and there was blacked out aspects of that, rooms and so on in the complex were blacked out. Why? What's Beijing hiding? I think for this to go ahead, they need to be 110% transparent. They need to explain what every room will be used for, i.e. this will be a reception, this will be a visa processing room, etc. Whatever the case may be. Because the size of this complex in itself is a major, major question mark. It's big enough to allow them to engage in nefarious activities. I am surprised that the security services have given the green light. It would seem to contradict what they've been saying. Because the other thing I would say, though, is the government makes these generic statements about not tolerating interference from any foreign state, but they are refusing to talk about China directly. It's almost like Starmer and Reeves and co are reluctant to offend Beijing, and yet they're very vocal when it comes to Russia, and that's good. I want them to be. I think it's right that Starmer and Lamy and Cooper are very vocal at the UN about what Russia is doing. Good, great. I want to see that. But why not with China? Why are they so super cautious? It's almost like they don't want to offend the tiger, I think that there is arguably no graver threat, or no graver responsibility, I should say, for any government than national security. If they mess up on that, everything else could be thrown out the window, because that is a fundamental point about responsibility. Economic growth isn't worth it in the long run if it comes at the price of serious espionage. For example, if we find that we go through a major cyber attack just after this embassy is approved, it won't happen immediately because the Communist Party of China isn't stupid, but at some point that could happen. And I think that would fall squarely on Keir Starmer and his government. I mean, it would be an unforgivable gamble with our national security. And I just think we're seeing more of the same. When is it going to take a British government to wake up and realise that China is not our friend? And we can't just deal with them like a big economy. Because that's, I think, how successive governments have seen China. They've seen it as, well, it's a huge economy, we have to just work with them. Rather than seeing it as, okay, it's a huge economy, but they also have clearly belligerent intentions towards the West, towards Western liberal democracies. When are we going to see a British government getting some backbone to stand up to China? Now, Starmer has brought up human rights issues. He's done that at the G20 last year. But to me, right now, the message is clear. Beijing can get what it wants. They were claiming that they were losing patience over the mega embassy. So it seems to me that this suggestion that Starmer is going to go ahead and approve it, is a way of appeasing Beijing. That's unforgivable. And like I say, generic statements about taking national security seriously and, warding off foreign threats. If it's generic, then it's a reluctance to name China by name. They can condemn Russia, and rightly so. I welcome it. But why not China? Why can Keir Starmer not publicly say, I do not accept China threatening British MPs? Why won't he say that? So with all of this in mind, I don't really think Labour's in a position to be lecturing on national security. Reform deserves scrutiny, but I say they should get it from other parties. I don't think Labour is in a position to do that. So that's how I feel about it. I mean, you could argue that no senior Labour minister has actually spied for China. It's not like that, but so therefore it differs from reform. But this is gambling with national security. It is I just cannot believe how astonishingly naive this government is being. When are they going to get that message? You know, we've been seeing this for years. The golden era of relations back in 2015 was an illusion. It was one of the worst foreign policy decisions the Cameron Osborne government took. I include chancellors because chancellors obviously have a very, very big say in this sort of thing. So that definitely darkens Cameron's legacy. It's definitely a blot on his record. And Starmer's learned nothing from it. In opposition, they spoke tough. In government, they're soft. Labour is soft on China. That's the truth. I don't care what sort of messages they put out, because when they are simultaneously saying, oh, we take national security seriously and we're not going to tolerate any threats from hostile foreign states. Oh, but by the way, you can have the biggest embassy in Europe. It's a contradictory message. What they need to do is say to Beijing, sorry, there's too many question marks with this. Either you give us the plans 100% transparently, or this isn't going to go ahead. And I'll close with this, when it comes to China, any approach takes risk. Standing up to them, of course they will lash out, of course they will get into an angry rant, of course there's a risk of reprisals. So for example, they could make it difficult for businesses in China, British businesses in China. They could cause difficulties with the British embassy in China. That to me, it's not good, but it's still preferable to the risk of espionage in this country, to a major national security threat, because China sees us as soft. That's my biggest frustration with this. Xi Jinping's regime is going to see us as a pushover. I mean, look at how they've treated our friends in Australia and Canada and elsewhere. In Australia, they threatened to destroy the Australian wine industry for asking for an independent inquiry into COVID. Australia didn't even blame China, they simply called for an independent inquiry. In the case of Canada, we've seen clear attempts to interfere in their general election. This is how Beijing operates. As far as I'm concerned, the Chinese Communist Party are a pack of thugs. And all they care about is power for power's sake. Power, power, power is all Xi Jinping cares about. So that's what we're dealing with. And if it's unforgivable that we have a Labour government that is more of the same, soft on China. I get that there's some areas where we have to work with them. I get that you cannot just put up a big block to the world's second biggest economy. But that doesn't mean you have to appease them. It doesn't mean you have to give them everything they want. It doesn't mean you have to allow a mega embassy to go ahead that is very potentially going to be a major national security risk. I just think it's outrageous. And I just don't think Labour's in a position to lecture on national security so long as they are soft on China. I've seen very little to the contrary. Naming those two young women to sort of send out a message at Beijing, I don't think it goes far enough. They could do a lot more. They can close the Confucius Institutes. They can publicly, Keir Starmer can publicly, by name, condemn China's threats towards British parliamentarians. They can publicly threaten to withdraw funding from universities that don't take this seriously, i.e. universities that allow Chinese students to bully their peers. Because there's been clear evidence of this happening. I'm sick and tired of this country being a soft touch when it comes to China. And yes, I'm criticising Labour. The Tories are not much better, so Kemi Badenoch should be careful in her criticism of this. She needs to make it very clear what would she do as Prime Minister regarding the China threat. So far, the only party that I've seen that has consistently stood up to China and Russia, only significant party, is the Liberal Democrats. But how do I know that if they won a general election, they wouldn't just suddenly start appeasing China? Because Keir Starmer in opposition took a tough line on this. Now in government, he's an appeaser. I mean, the mega embassy is just a total mistake. If they blocked it, Beijing would have a tantrum. Of course they would. But that is still, in my view, preferable to the alternative, which is gambling with our national security. I mean, actually, allowing Beijing to have a tantrum would be a good thing because it would expose them for what they are. These wolf warrior diplomats are bullies, they're thugs. They think that throwing their weight around foreign diplomacy is how to conduct business. They need to be exposed for it because that's who we're dealing with.